You know why I broke up with Luca? Not because I don't like him. He's amazing. It's because there's something that I can't tell him. You're right. I keep secrets. I lie all the time. I lie to my friends, to my parents, to everyone. And the worst thing is I can't do it any other way.
There's always another way.
No, not this time.
Shipping wars aren't really anything new when it comes to fandom spaces. They've been around since media consumption was popularized, just as fanfiction has been. Hell, according to one of my best friends, her mom bought physical copies of Star Trek fanfiction at conventions, since it was a time before sites like AO3 and fanfiction.net existed. So with something that people are so heavily passionate about, it should come as no surprise that there's a lot of discourse that's also associated with it. This discourse can sometimes tear fandoms apart, two or more quote-unquote sides being formed from the fracture. Of course, this was far more prevalent in places like the Twilight fandom, where there were literally so-called teams in support of who they wanted the main character to end up with. And this stuff was taken incredibly seriously. I know I'm going to sound like an old woman here for a second, but when I was in middle school, the whole Team Jacob and Team Edward thing was literally a friendship-ending decision. Thank God I myself was never into it, but I remember very clearly how others in my friend group would get legitimately mad depending on who you chose. And it was the same thing in high school with the Hunger Games series. All I'm going to say on that one is that I'm glad that Katniss ended up with Peeta because I did not like the vibes that Gale gave off. Anyways, what were we talking about again? Oh, right. Miraculous Ladybug. So, Miraculous is a show that very heavily relies on the romance aspect to draw in its audience. And that's not a bad thing considering the show at its core is a love story. While action and lore certainly is a large part of it, the relationship between Marinette and Adrien, and by extension Ladybug and Cat Noir, has generally always been the center theme. And for a lot of us, myself included, waiting for the identity reveal and angst or jubilation that comes with it is one of, if not the main reason we're so invested in the first place. But what would an action-based love story with superheroes be without a little romantic conflict? Am I right? Enter Kagami and Luca.
My name's Adrien. What's yours?
Kagami.
Kagami was first introduced in the Season 2 episode Repost, where she's shown to be a worthy fencing adversary to Adrien, who is the top of his class. Adrien immediately takes a liking to her because he thinks that she's interesting, and this is essentially where the audience is given clues that she's a potential love interest to create a metaphorical roadblock between Adrien and Marinette being together. Luca is introduced in the Season 2 episode Captain Hard Rock, and it's the same case here. Marinette very clearly has an interest in him near automatically, and that's only driven by Luca's calming nature and their shared interest in musicians like Jagged Stone. As the show progresses, we get to see more of these characters' dynamics with their prospective alternative love interests, and it's supposed to create a sense of worry in the viewer. These characters work well together, so it's supposed to make you anxious in the respect that you think Adrien will end up with Kagami and Marinette with Luca, rather than Marinette and Adrien ending up together. Of course, we know by now that that isn't what's going to happen, but from a narrative perspective, it's supposed to set up a conflict that makes the payoff of Adriennette eventually becoming canon to be more gratifying and seem more earned. But I'm not here to talk about why Lucanette and Adragami were utilized in the series to make the main and final ship in canon to be more impactful, because beyond what I just said, I don't think there's much more to explain. However, I did want to talk about these relationships and why the characters in question decided to end them. Because as I stated in the start of the video, the fights in regards to shipping wars can be incredibly volatile, with these characters and their characterization getting caught in the crossfire. All of the canonical relationships in the show have their problems, and one is not more perfect, more pure, or better suited than any of the others. This is all supposed to be just for fun, and I think sometimes people go a little too far in trying to advocate for their favorite ship. I've seen blatant mischaracterization from both ends and outright character hate in most instances. So allow me to insert my 2 cents where it isn't wanted and explain why these characters broke up and why it made logical sense. Aside from the main purpose glaring us in the face, that is. Trust me, it works when looking at the character dynamics and chemistry at play here.
I don't want to lie to you, Luca. I don't think I can. I mean, maybe we should.
When you're ready, I'll be here, Marinette.
So for this video, I want to focus on 2 episodes specifically. Those being the Season 4 episodes, Episode 1 Truth and Episode 2 Lies. I know that a lot of you keep asking me to do episode reviews of the new season, but that's not the type of content that I've ever made, nor am I interested in making it. So this analysis is sort of my way of talking about the new season without outright reviewing it. I know that seems a little off topic, but I wanted to put that out there for the people who keep asking and wondering if that's something that I'm eventually going to be doing. As of right now, it isn't. Anyways, Truth and Lies are essentially the breakup episodes for Adrien and Marinette, paving the way for either a canonical Lady Noir setup or an Adriennette setup. But with how Season 4 is going so far, one of these relationships is more likely than the other. More on that later though, because Lady Noir and Adriennette as ships are not free from problems either. So we're going to start with the episode Truth first, since it's a setup that gives more perspective on the situation as a whole. So, Marinette is recently the new Guardian of the Miraculous, picking up from the Season 3 plot point of Fu relinquishing his status and losing his memory of anything Kwame and Guardian related. This leaves Mari alone with little to no guidance since she honestly wasn't trained all too well. At least not in a formal sense, Fu really didn't teach her all too much in terms of Kwame care and Guardian responsibilities. This is likely since he himself didn't know as he left the temple and accidentally destroyed it before his training was completed. And due to miraculous rules, the Kwames don't know much either and can offer little to no assistance. Even Tiki can only offer comfort and words of encouragement. And being honest here for a moment, even if let's just say hypothetically Marinette was trained professionally and given all of the answers that she needed, it would still be a lot for a teenager to handle amongst every other day responsibilities. Hell, as an adult, I find juggling interpersonal relationships and just everyday menial life tasks to be difficult. I can't even begin to imagine how hard it is to cope with being a superhero, a teenager still figuring out how relationships work, and adequately completing school assignments all at the same time. And her inability to do so is what leads to her relationship with Luca failing, amongst the other relationships with her friends and Cat Noir as well, but we'll get into that later as I mentioned. And this isn't the first time we've seen this displayed in the show, as we've actually had an entire episode on it. In the episodes Feast and Backwater, it's revealed that Fu essentially became a social shut-in, even going so far as to sabotage his own love life with Marianne Lenore. Hell, part of his training was literally being taken away from his family by force and no longer being allowed to see them. Being a guardian is so demanding that interpersonal relationships are seen as reductive and an unnecessary addition to their responsibilities, as it only serves as a distraction. And the reason that it's seen as such is because it isn't something that they can reasonably handle at the same time as something that demands their full attention and devotion. Especially when the most important thing in a relationship is communication, and you can't really have a full and open communication if such a large part of yourself needs to remain a secret. And lack of communication is what led to Luca being akumatized into the supervillain Truth. Because she's Ladybug, Marinette has a tendency to disappear suddenly and with less than valid excuses. She leaves Luca hanging multiple times during their date and even forgets that it's happening because of just how swamped she is with her superhero responsibilities. Now, she isn't really necessarily wrong to be doing this because yes, protecting Paris is important. And no, revealing her identity to him probably wouldn't be the smartest thing at this point in time and would only add more stress to an already weakening relationship. So that leaves her in the sticky situation of wanting to be with him, but also being unable to explain why she is giving mixed signals. The thing here as well is that even if Luca knew, the frequency in which she needed to leave and abandon their plans wouldn't have been any different. So you're also stuck in a situation where even if you knew that your romantic partner was a hero and that's why they were disappearing, it doesn't really solve the issue of them being gone and not putting time into the relationship. And considering that was the main issue here, knowing the truth behind why she was constantly leaving wouldn't have made it any better, because the behavior itself wouldn't have changed. Being involved with a hero is a commitment all its own because you can't have a normal relationship, even if you yourself aren't the one with powers. And those who don't want that type of life for themselves aren't bad or selfish people, and they're completely justified in setting that personal boundary. I don't think most people could handle that type of relationship and knowing that they come second in their loved one's life. This is actually an issue explored more cohesively in the series Invincible between the characters Mark and Amber, but I digress. And this isn't limited to romantic relationships either. There's plenty of series that explore the lives of friends or children who have important parental figures who put them second due to a so-called greater purpose or profession, and Adrien is actually one of those characters. You can see the effect that Gabriel's lack of communication and interaction does to him, aside from his reasoning being far more nefarious. And this isn't to say that Mari is the only one at fault in the relationship failing. Luca, believe it or not, was not entirely innocent in this situation. Being laid back and understanding is an amazing quality to have, but being so laid back that you're allowing yourself to suffer and not communicating isn't. Communication in this instance is the responsibility of both parties, and Luca wasn't communicating that Marinette's actions were hurting him. Of course, it should seem obvious, but he was putting on a front that he was unbothered by it, which is why it ended up escalating to the point of him becoming akumatized in the first place. Him confronting the situation and then lying and saying he wasn't upset wasn't exactly helping matters either, especially when it's revealed throughout the episode that he's aware that Marinette is still in love with Adrien, yet is continuing on in the relationship even though it clearly does bother him despite him saying otherwise. This contributed to why the relationship failed, though the whole secret identity thing was the biggest contributor overall. But the most important thing to note here is that both Luca and Mari are still kids. I think that's something people brush over a lot when analyzing the actions of these characters, but they're literally only teenagers. This is likely the first relationship that Luca has had, and we know for certain that it is Mari's. Not to doubt the intelligence of the young and innocent, but relationships are difficult. You only learn how they work through experience, so it would stand to reason that these two have never dated anyone before and aren't exactly sure how to go about it. So I don't think it's fair to be harsh on either of them in this instance, and for that reason. Treating them as adults when looking at the relationship just doesn't work because, again, they aren't adults. And even with Luca in relation to his mom not telling him that his father is Jagged Stone, it seems like he would ask and then drop it instead of communicating just how much the secrecy hurt him. Luca states that the truth needs to be given and not taken, and that's a good sentiment to have. However, sometimes you do need to press people a little further and explain why you need to know something. But that's also something that you learn with age, so I'm not going to fault him for it. So again, when looking at the relationship objectively, the main problem with it is the communication and is why it didn't work out. So while the truth should have been given rather than forced out, sometimes you do need to be a bit persistent rather than just taking it laying down. In this instance, Luca's error was letting this go on for so long and not explaining to Marinette why her very obvious lying was damaging their relationship, and instead expecting her to come to him with the truth on her own. You also have Marinette realizing that that's the reason as well, though she's also concerned when it comes to the safety of said boyfriend and not just the fact that she needs to lie about her identity. This is what I mean in that you learn how relationships work as you have and go through them, because now Mari exited that relationship with the knowledge that she has to have better communication skills with others in her life, which is what I'm sure is what led to revealing her identity to Alya in Gang of Secrets. The other issues with friendships in this case was that Mari was potentially going to lose all of her friends directly after Luca for the same reason, and because of the lesson that she learned with him and her relationship with him, she learned that she needed help and that she needed to tell somebody that she trusted. That somebody ended up being Alya, since Alya is her best friend and sole confidant. We see through other episodes in the season that Alya helps Ladybug get through sticky situations, becoming another person that she can fully rely on. This is invaluable since she also knows her civilian identity and they can work together easier with that barrier no longer there. The fact that that barrier is still there between her and Kat, however, oof. Now getting into Kagami and Adrien, their situation is more or less the same, though it's more complicated due to the added dynamics that's unique to them. And Lord knows I love talking about Adrien on this channel, so you know that I have more than just saying lack of communication is to blame here. Now, Adrien and Kagami are an interesting case because they both come from wealthy families with influential parents. Kagami's mother seems to be just as strict as Gabriel is with Adrien, and they both seem to have similar lives in terms of high-class responsibilities. So while Adrien is a model for his father's fashion company, Kagami is expected to be a world-class fencer because that's what her family is known for. And in Repost, we can see what happens if she isn't. They're both on very strict schedules, have very high expectations that they need to meet, are in ways both public figures, and receive extremely harsh punishment for acting out of line. In a lot of ways, they're perfect for each other and both well adjusted to their respective ways of life. And what I mean about this is that they can understand how each other is feeling and can relate to what they're both going through. It's shown that both Kagami and Adrien aren't really happy with the lives that they're being told they need to live, and they often skip lessons and responsibilities to goof off when they know it's safe to do so. They know what it's like to have expectations crushing each other relentlessly and to have the eyes of others always on you and analyzing every little thing that you do. Essentially, living your life for somebody else, or in this case, living a life for public consumption. In that way, Kagami makes an excellent friend and even better romantic partner for Adrien. As much as Marinette claims to like the blonde, I feel like she doesn't know him or his struggles very well. She could certainly understand the crushing weight of responsibility because of her life as Ladybug, but she also isn't under public scrutiny in her day-to-day life and with her relationships. Her identity is a secret, so she could very easily take her spots off and live life as a normal girl, in terms of her superficial interactions with others, that is. And this can be attributed to her lack of communication skills overall, since she hasn't really spent time getting to know him and instead is focused on the public perception and how perfect she thinks his public image is. Essentially, she started out being in love with Adrien the model rather than Adrien the person. And that's why the episode Lies hurts so much, because it's shown that Kagami doesn't really know him any better. She knows his struggles better than anyone else does, other than Chloe of course, but when she asks him to do a pose that he feels the most natural in, she tells him that neither pose he chooses reflects him. Which is interesting to note here because he does both a pose as Adrien as well as Kat, splitting his two alter egos into categories rather than combining them to be the most authentic. And this is a nod to the fact that while Adrien is both his civilian and hero personas, the real him is somewhere in the middle. Kat and Adrien aren't two different people despite how differently they behave on surface level. Sometimes Kat comes through in Adrien, like when he's goofing off, or Adrien will come through in Kat, like when he's giving Ladybug a pep talk. The real Adrien falls between the two, but it seems that not even he's aware of that. However, Kagami is at the very least aware that he's being dishonest with her. But like Mari, she's under the impression that Adrien is literally perfect. I mean, she actually states this.
There. This is really you.
Do you really think?
Yes, you're perfect.
Like, hearing that line actually stung because Adrien is far from perfect and he needs somebody who realizes that. And in a lot of cases, Ladybug is the one who does realize it. It hurts her because she feels as if he isn't comfortable enough being around her to be himself, which isn't at all the case. My boy is just very traumatized and very oblivious. He can't exactly be himself around her when he doesn't know who that is. He dislikes his life as Adrien so much that he has a tendency to split the two egos into different people because they both live entirely different lives. Pardon the cat analogy, but it's like if one was a pampered purebred indoor cat and the other was a stray moggy alley cat, whereas his true self is essentially an indoor-outdoor cat. I swear that analogy made way more sense in my head. So the problem with Adrien and Kagami, alongside the issue that Luca and Mari also have, is that Kagami thinks she knows who Adrien is as a person, and it bothers her immensely that he feels as though he can't be open around her, as she's being open with him by telling him that her secret is that she enjoys drawing. And of course, because there is no communication there in terms of, hey, I'm actually a superhero and that's why I can't be open with you, it makes matters much, much worse. Because eventually, assumptions end up being made in the place of an actual explanation. Adrien constantly disappearing without notice and rejecting Kagami's advances because of Akuma attacks is also a big reason why it led to the breakup as well, especially when you consider that Kagami is also aware that Adrien is in love with someone else. In fact, she knew this before she even started dating him, and that didn't bother her at first, with the assumption that dating someone else would help him to get over the heartbreak, and that eventually he would come around to loving her instead. And I do believe that Adrien's interests and affections towards Kagami were genuine, just as I believe that Marinette's were in regards to Luca. It's just that unfortunately, for these two characters, their true affections lie elsewhere. You can love and be romantically interested in more than one person at once, and unfortunately they just so happen to still be in love with another person more. Though, I also feel that the superhero aspect was pushing this, as I do believe that eventually, without it being a part of their lives, they could probably date other people who they were interested in successfully. And we know this because the only thing stopping them from kissing or spending time together was Akuma attacks. When you put it that way, it just sounds like a bunch of
destiny rubbish.
The difference in both of these cases is that where Marinette was the one to end her relationship with Luca, Kagami was the one to break it off with Adrien. Kagami is much better with being straightforward with people, to the point of maybe being a bit too brutally honest at times. But don't get me wrong, I don't think she was wrong in this situation either. The hate that Kagami gets is way too overblown, and if I'm being honest, is borderline questionable in some of the stuff the fandom says about her. Of course, her communication could have been better as well, but again, they're kids. I think people need to start maybe judging them as kids and not adults. If I were in her shoes and the person who is dating me was rejecting advances repeatedly and not communicating with me and telling me what the problem was, I would likely do the same thing. Because at that point, you really have to wonder if they're actually interested in you or if there's some other problem that they're just not telling you about. We, the audience, know the truth of what's going on, but you need to keep in mind that they have very little context to the full situation. And at the end of the episode Lies, the problem with both relationships is more or less stated and put out into the open.
You know the difference between us and the rest of the world, milady? We can't be completely honest with each other. We keep secrets and sometimes we have to lie.
This is why things ultimately didn't work out. Alongside being teenagers with justifiably questionable social skills, they're also superheroes. And you need to keep in mind that the responsibility that comes with it is damaging. You can't be honest with everyone, and sometimes you can't be honest with anyone. In this instance, that's very much the case. But that's also leading into a part that I said I would get into later in the video. Season 4 is interesting, because as many have noticed, it's more or less become Miraculous Ladybug, Tales of Ladybug, and Rena Rouge. And that's not really a bad thing because it's about time that Alya got more screen time. However, Kat's involvement in this season, as well as Adrien's, has been incredibly minimal thus far. And I believe that this was a decision to further the narrative on relationships needing communication or they'll break down. Ladybug and Kat had a very strong partnership that won against all else because they had wordless communication and a dynamic that was stronger than their enemy. But right now, well, Ladybug is making the same mistake as she did with Luca, and unironically, the same exact mistake that Kat made in New York. While Cat Noir isn't her boyfriend and they're not romantically involved, they are crime-fighting partners. And with how she's treating him now, it's feeling more and more like he's a sidekick rather than her equal. And we know that he's also feeling this because of his reactions, but he's just trying to wait it out to see if it's a temporary thing or if it's more permanent. He's not reacting right away because that wouldn't help anyone. So far, it's only been 1 or 2 battles, so who's to say it's a pattern? And I'll probably do a full video on this later, but here's an incredibly brief overview of the issue. Ladybug hasn't told him that somebody knows her identity. She hasn't told him that Alya is now a permanent Miraculous holder, and she hasn't told him that she's training her to be a second in command of sorts when it comes to the Miracle Box. These all seem like things that he should have been warned about beforehand, or at the very least should have been told about directly after they happened. And because he's being kept in the dark, just like he was before with Fu, he's going to draw his own conclusions, understandably. And what conclusions could he possibly draw other than he's replaceable and that he's been replaced by Rena Rouge? The choices that Marinette is making are logical on paper, but they're only logical if you're given the context. Adrien isn't given that context. I'm not sure if there will ever be a full-on falling out between Ladybug and Kat, but I do feel like that's where this is headed. She's making the exact same mistakes that she made with Luca, just on a grander and more dangerous scale. I ultimately feel like this is leading to a rift between Kat and Ladybug's partnership, and potentially a Kat Blanc 2.0 situation. But we'll see. Let me know if you guys want to see a full video on that, because I have a lot more to say, but it doesn't really belong in the scope of this video. I just think that in terms of fandom drama and shipping wars, a lot of people tend not to look at these things from an objective standpoint. Like, I'll be honest, I really don't care if you prefer Lucanet over Adrianette. That's fine and valid, that's your vibe. But I also feel like when it comes to these things, people like to point a finger and fabricate reasons why one ship is worse or has less chemistry than the other. Or when people tend to demonize a character that's not part of their ship but gets in the way of it. Realistically, all of these ships have chemistry and they also have their issues when it comes to their dynamics. You know, kind of like real relationships. That's kind of the whole point here, and that's also why I mentioned Lady Noir. And this isn't a problem that Adrianette as a ship is exempt from either, as I mentioned previously with Marinette's love for Adrian being influenced heavily by his public image rather than himself. At least in a broad sense, I do think she's getting to know him a lot better at this point, especially when the moment she fell in love with him was from a moment where he was being compassionate and genuine. Plus, there was also the whole communication error between both Ladybug and Cat Noir in the New York special, where Cat failed to tell Ladybug that he had a change of plans and would no longer be in Paris to protect it while Ladybug was away. Communication is also a problem in that instance as well, though lacking the romantic context. The point is, you can say that you like a ship without completely fabricating reasons why the so-called opposing ship just doesn't work. At the end of the day, we're realistically just watching a show about two teenagers who somehow haven't figured out their respective identities in multiple years despite many slip-ups and hints. It's just for fun, and in general, I think we need to take that aspect of fandom culture a little less seriously, because as you can see, none of these relationships are perfect or better than the other. You just have different preferences, and that's completely fine. Have fun. And if you'd like to see more analysis like this and videos on Miraculous Ladybug in the future, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon to be notified of when I upload. Special thank you to my top tier patrons: Ambrose Rothwood, Jeffy Games, Brandon Nunes, The Lovely Ghosty, Sadin Suzuki, Lee Taylor, Shion Ifan, and Zachary Ansley. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.